الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. So last week in session 4 we finished with reading the hadith known as the hadith of Zara. We read that hadith since the author of the book that we're going through, and hearing becomes listening, he had mentioned it as an example of how the Prophet ﷺ was a very attentive listener starting at home. Even before going outside and dealing with other people and listening to them, at home when he would be with his family, and in the hadith that we read, it was with his wife Aisha radiyallahu anha, that he listened very attentively to the whole entire story she told. And as we were reading, for those of you who were able to join us last week, you recall the hadith, or rather the story at face value, doesn't seem to offer profound spiritual wisdom or anything. And yet the Prophet ﷺ listened attentively. And at the end he even commented on it, that I am to you like Abu Zar' was to Zar', except I will not divorce you. And so now, as we move forward, the author now mentions that the fear of the unknown must not prevent us from facing what is within. And this is kind of finishing up a thought that we had mentioned maybe 2 or 3 sessions ago, which is that oftentimes the difficulty we have when listening to somebody is what they're talking about makes us very uncomfortable. Like we can't even hear their thoughts, their experiences. It triggers something within us. So sometimes we don't want to listen, or we don't have the tolerance to listen. But a good listener necessarily has to have the courage and the ability to sit and hear something that might make them deeply uncomfortable and not overreact or react in a way that actually worsens the situation. Just recently, a mother came in and she had brought her son who had left Islam. And it was very hard for her as a mother to listen to her son say things that were so contrary to what she believed and what she had brought her son up upon. Right? So she just couldn't listen to it. She couldn't hear it. And when I asked, privately, her son mentioned that she had actually become really, really upset. In front of me, she didn't get overly upset, but she was just clear discomfort. But privately, she had just exploded on him. How could you say these things, and how can you ask these questions? While understandably she's upset by what she's hearing, that's not going to answer the questions, right? And that's not going to entertain or at least allow for further questions. The message that the child probably would take is that, well, I guess I shouldn't ask any questions. I guess I shouldn't ask any questions. You know what this child said? I say child, but he's 18 years old. He said, I don't know, some of y'all are laughing like, yeah, it shows how old you are, right? Thank you. But you're right. But what was interesting was that he said he's had these questions for a very long time. And he said something, his wording, he said, I've had these questions since I was young, but obviously I couldn't ask them, which is very interesting. Obviously I couldn't ask them. What do you mean obviously? Why couldn't you ask them? Why weren't you able to bring them forward? Present them? And it was interesting. Same day, I'm walking down a hallway and I run into a parent with their same day, with another son. And he says, my son has all these questions. I said, that's great. I could definitely talk to him. And he gets really upset. He's like, he's been asking me these questions for the last year and I haven't had an answer. He's driving me crazy. And in my head, I'm thinking, 1 year? Like, why wouldn't you take him to somebody to answer the questions early on? What were you doing for 1 year if you couldn't answer them? But it's very interesting that sometimes we don't have a culture where people are allowed to express the doubts they have. Not because we think doubts are a good thing. We're not meant to expose ourselves voluntarily to doubts, and I want to make that very clear. The idea that you would just go searching for doubts is not a good practice. If a doubt comes to you, then you have to get it addressed. And you should make a very, very solid effort to address the doubt. But we're not encouraged to go searching for doubts. But regardless, there should be a culture if people have doubts that they're able to come forward and ask. And ask in such a way that they won't be shamed for asking. They won't be put down, right? And we have to foster that. But in order to foster that, you have to be able to what? To tolerate what you're hearing, which can be very offensive, especially if someone believes something very against what you believe. Now, he says here, fear of the unknown must not prevent us from facing what is within. See, when something makes you uncomfortable, right, a part of you is just not able to hear it. We have to completely face the voices that come from within, he says. He says, ignored voices eventually become unignorable screams. And we could apply this to so many different things. An example would be doubts about your religion. Initially, you have a doubt pop up, and you try to ignore it. You don't want to address it. You're not so confident in your religion, but hey, let's not talk about that. So you kind of stuff it under the carpet. Time goes on, it nags at you, but you don't address it. But then you start weakening in your practice, your deeds. Like, you don't feel so motivated to pray anymore. You don't feel so motivated to fast anymore. And you're not sure why. So you try harder, but you're not able to, because there's a weakness in the foundation. Do you understand? And at some point, that doubt starts screaming at you that you need to get an answer. Do you understand? And sometimes that's when people, after a long time, trying so hard to get better and improve and get closer to Allah, no matter all their efforts, they weren't able to do it, then finally they turn and they face that voice. So the voices that we have that, highlight some type of discomfort we experience with something, if we don't address it and we don't learn to face it, it will come back. And it will especially get triggered when someone says something. Do you understand that? Yeah, go ahead.
How do you know if it's a doubt or if it's just shaitan pulling you astray?
Well, it could be that shaitan is trying to cast a doubt, or shaitan is trying to push you in a certain direction. One way to know that it's shaitan is to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. When you have a thought that crosses your mind and you think it's shaitan, say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. If the thought disappears, that's from shaitan. But if it seems to persist over a lengthy period of time, then you should go speak to somebody. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, it's like a child. The child comes to you, wants to talk to you, and you don't address it. What does the child do now? Any parents here? Any parents? Yeah. What happens? When the child comes and you ignore them, for whatever reason, they'll just say it louder. Abu, right? And you ignore Abu, and they start really raising their voice because they need to get your attention. We raise our voice when we feel we're not being heard, even if the person's right in front of us. The voice, and I'll give you an example here. Because avoiding the unknown doesn't lessen the stress that we experience. Why do we avoid the unknown? Why? Because it's uncomfortable to face it. We don't know what we're going to find. So we avoid it. The problem is, it only builds up. It eventually causes inner chaos. How? Because you'll adopt certain coping mechanisms to deal with whatever it is deep down that makes you uncomfortable. You'll adopt certain coping mechanisms. Over time, those coping mechanisms will add up and begin to actually harm you. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine you have a close friend. This is a more, you could say, not a trivial example, but a less serious example. let's say a close friend comes and says something to you that really upsets you. Right? They say something to you and, for whatever reason, it really upsets you. But you mask it. You don't show it. Okay? And now it just sits with you. And it kind of festers within. Like, why did they say that? And a part of you wants to really address it, but then you're not confrontational, so you're not going to address it. They don't even realize that they've done something wrong. That hurts even more. Like, look, they said something wrong. That hurt. They don't even realize that they really hurt me. That hurts too. They're just going on with life like everything's fine. That hurts. And there's this inner pain. So and you can't even face them. Because when you face them, it angers you. But if you don't want to show your anger, because you're non-confrontational. So what do? You begin to avoid them. And then you begin to avoid the places that they go. See, these are all coping mechanisms. You're just trying to work around the problem. The problem is that you have something to say. You feel wronged, and you need to speak up and address it. Now, there's a way to learn how to do that. That's really critical, guys. Before you get married, make sure you learn how to engage in healthy conflict. Absolutely. Conflict resolution, learn. It is something to be learned. Not because, Shaykh, I don't want to get in conflicts. Yeah, I know you don't want to, but you're going to. Since you know you're going to end up in some conflicts, learn how to resolve that. Have a plan and a strategy of how you're going to try to resolve that conflict. But let's say this person doesn't know how to do that. They don't know how to come to the table, express their hurt and pain without, exploding. So what do? Avoid this person. And avoid all the places this person goes. And then you have to avoid their friends, because their friends will be asking you about them. Hey, did you hear about them? And you can't be like, no, I didn't hear. Hey, why not? They didn't tell you? Yeah, they didn't tell me. Well, that's interesting. I thought you guys were close. And then what do you say now? Do you say, yes, we are? Or do you say, no, we... Avoid their friends. So now you're not just hanging out, you're avoiding this person, you're avoiding places maybe that you like to go to, you're avoiding their friends. Now who are you hanging out with? You begin to feel quite lonely. No one notices. No one notices your pain. And this angers you further because they're the cause of it. Because of them now, you can't even go to these places, you can't even hang out with your friends. They're the source of all your problems in your head. And then you continue to isolate yourself and victimize yourself. Like, no one notices my pain. Here I am. I'm miserable. Nobody notices. My best friend, who I thought was my best friend, they caused me all this pain, and they're just going on happily. That affects your mental health. Suddenly you begin to spiral. It affects all the different things in your life. You don't have the motivation to go to the gym, so now you're not even working out physically anymore. And within you, there's this voice that's just screaming to be addressed and faced. Do you understand that? Where did all this come from? It came from the inability at the very beginning to face the anger that you have within and say, what is a healthy and constructive way to address this and channel this? Do you understand? And it has to be learned, the skill. Because otherwise, if you keep avoiding these things in life, it causes inner chaos. Do you understand? And it begins to affect different aspects of your life. It's very interesting, subhanAllah, how the human being, when they suppress certain things that they know to be true, when you know something to be true, for example, and you suppress it, and you hide, it'll cause deep inner chaos. Do you understand this? That's why you'll find people who know the truth of Islam, but can't seem to express or just admit. They live very, very torn lives. And the day that they accept Islam, it's like they're just freed from all that inner tension. And for many of us, that's kind of how we live our lives, if we're honest. A part of us really wants to submit to Allah. And we know it's the truth. and we know it's what's good for us, and we know that if we pass away, that submitting to Allah will be the best state in which to pass away. Then we have another part of us that's not the truth, that wants what is haram, that wants what displeases Allah. And so we kind of go in that direction a little bit. And we live with this constant turmoil inside. So we'll even go to that wedding that we're invited to, but we'll feel guilty being there. And we'll try to be happy to show everyone we're happy, but we're not really happy. Deep down, we're miserable at the level of our soul. Do you understand? The human being, Allah says in the Quran, مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah has never given anybody two hearts. That I have one heart devoted to Allah and one heart devoted to something of the dunya. Impossible. You have one heart, and that has to be devoted wholeheartedly to Allah. And so the war that each of us is fighting spiritually runs across the battlefield of our hearts. That's really what it is. Okay, the author goes on to talk about social bonding as an innate quality of being human. And he quotes an etymological point here. He says that the word for human in Arabic is insan, which comes from a root that means to be social. That's one meaning, all right? It's insan coming from the root of uns, which means to be social or intimately close to someone, or it comes from nisyan. That's another, opinion, to be forgetful. If we take this meaning, the root that it means to be social and intimately close with other people, it suggests that not only is social integration a need of humans, but that interacting and bonding is an integral part of who we are. So, this is really important, because sometimes I think we think community is it's just like an option. It's like an extracurricular activity. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could go and be part of a community, and that's a nice thing, but I don't really need it. I don't really need it. Actually, no. Human beings innately need to be connected to people. Now, it may not be a huge community. You may not have a huge, friend circle. But everyone needs people in their lives that care about them, that are there for them. What's very interesting is you don't even necessarily need someone to always be there with you. But you need people who you can turn to in those moments of pain, in those moments when you're slipping. And the person who doesn't have that can really, really struggle. We have an innate need to belong to part of some type of social group. And if we don't feel that belonging, it can cause a person a great deal of pain. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ recorded by Al-Imam al-Tirmidhi in his Sunan from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, where he says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, إِذَا كُنْتُمْ ثَلَاثَةً فَلَا يَتَنَاجَ اثْنَانِ دُونَ صَاحِبِهِمَا فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يُحْزِنُ. He said, if there are three of you, if there's three people sitting together, then two of them should not talk privately in a way that excludes the third person, because that will grieve them. Now, you could exclude them by speaking a different language, or by, come to the side here and kind of whispering something to them. So there's many different ways you could exclude that person. Now let's take a moment to think about this. Let's say you're not saying anything bad about them. You're literally just talking about something that's relevant to the two of you and not that person. What's the big deal? One of us might say, that third person, they should do husnul dhan. They should hold a good opinion. Right? But the Prophet ﷺ says, don't exclude that third person. Don't speak in a way that excludes them. Make sure that they're part of the conversation. Because he says at the end, فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يُحْزِنُ. He said, excluding them from the convo will pain them. Will sadden them. So, it's not even a matter of, are we actually saying something that's going to hurt their feelings or not? Or whether or not it's even relevant to them. That's not the point. The point is, don't let people around you feel excluded. Don't let them feel excluded. Don't let them even potentially think that maybe the two of you are talking about something regarding them. Don't even allow for that suspicion to arise. Make sure you speak openly, such that the three of you are engaged in this conversation. Does that make sense? And it goes to show what? Making sure people feel like they belong. Because if they don't feel like they belong, it's very painful. There's a hadith he quotes where the Prophet ﷺ said, Shaitan is a wolf to humanity. He preys on the lonely, isolated sheep, so stay close to the group. I mean, this is why in our deen, when you look at it, there are so many communal acts that are emphasized. For example, we have congregational practices. Come together for prayer. Come together for prayer. If someone might just say, well, I'm praying to Allah. I'm not praying to you. And I'm not praying to you either. So I'll just pray to my Lord in my house. Our deen says no. Come together in congregation and pray together to Allah. What could be the benefit of coming together? This right here. Shaitan will prey on the lonely person, the isolated person. Shaitan will come to that person and weaken their faith. And, cast doubts into their heart. And if you don't have anybody else to grab your hand and keep you from slipping, you could easily slip and not get back up for a while. We're taught to build masjids. That's why how many of you have been to like a really small town where very few Muslims, and maybe they even rent a room to get together and pray? How many of you have been to such a place? Because Muslims are taught to do that. It could be like 10 Muslims. Someone might say, well, we're only 10 Muslims. We don't really need a masjid. Or we don't really need to get together. We're only 10 of us. No. We're taught, no. If there's 3 of you, 4 of you, 5 of you, come together and pray together. There is great, great benefit to your iman in doing so. Does that make sense? What about the funeral prayer? How many people are needed technically speaking, if you are not considering the Islamic rulings, how many people are needed to bury somebody? Like 2, 3 people, right? Take the person, go wash the body, put them down. The family members can come together and pray over the person. And then what? Take the body and go bury it. No, we are taught what? Great reward. You get great reward for doing what? For coming and joining the funeral prayer. Why? You're not needed, technically. You're not needed. The prayer can go on without you. It's not even from the 5 prayers. And yet the Prophet ﷺ told us great reward, 1 qirat, for coming to pray. And then, not just that. What about following the funeral procession? Taking the body to the graveyard and being there during the burial. This is huge moral support for the family. This is coming together. You understand? Coming together. And a person doesn't feel so alone in that moment. To have all their community around them. Because sometimes in those moments, I don't know if you've ever seen this, sometimes the family's not in a position emotionally to even do what needs to be done. Have you ever seen that? Where they're crying, they're bawling their eyes out. They can barely come forward and try to wash the body or whatever. Yet someone else steps up in that moment and says, don't worry, we got you. We'll take care of it. Right? They're too emotional. And that's just the congregational practices. What about social practices? What are we taught? When you meet someone, say salam. If it's after a long time, give them a hug. Feed one another. Visit someone who's sick. Which is, interesting one, right? Because if someone's sick, what are you going to do? You go, and if they're sick, you're going to get sick? But you don't have to necessarily go into the room and spend 10 minutes with them. You could drop off food. Right? Drop off food. Give them a call. Come inside the room briefly. Assalamu alaikum. Hope you're doing well. Make some dua for them. La ba's. Tahur inshallah. Adhib al-ba's rabb al-nas. Ishfi anta shafi. Right? Make the dua for them. But if it's a contagious you're not required to go sit there, but the point is, hey, someone's thinking about me. Someone's noticing. Sending a message 2 days later, hey, how are you feeling? It could mean so much to someone. Do you understand? Condolences when someone passes away. Technically, it's not your loss, it's their loss. And yet it's a religious practice to go to their house and sit with them and make dua. Do you understand? Make dua for the deceased. Help them out. Anything that you can help, any help we can offer. In many Muslim communities, they bring food. Hey, we'll bring food for you. You don't have to cook because we know that you're probably grieving. To be there for one another. Shaitan preys on the lonely, isolated sheep. Come together. It's part of our religion. Allah, the creator of humans, knows the need of humans better than anyone. Now, the author turns to talk about something called social brain theory. And what he's saying here is that humans have developed larger brains compared to many, many other animals. Because why? Because we live in complex societies that have many interdependent relationships. That's the first point. The second point is that the size of the social groups that a species is able to maintain is limited by its cognitive capacity. And so a larger brain allows for more cognitive processing. Let's think about the first point. We have interdependent relationships, many. At one time, you are playing how many roles in your life? So how many of you are children? Like all of us will have parents. Some of us will have kids. Some of us will have siblings. Right? Many of us, if not all of us, will have close friends. Many of us will have employers. Or we will have employees. We play so many different roles. And each relationship, if you think about it, has a different dynamic and a different set of rights. And you have to be able to keep all that in mind. You can't treat your employer like you treat your sibling. Right? You can't do that. You have to know the etiquettes. You have to know how to behave. You have to remember what's their preferences. How do they like things? Well, what is it that they like? And we have to do all of these different things at the same time. And it's not easy, especially when you're stuck between two people. Then what do? Well, I don't want to upset them, but I also understand where they're coming from, and you're torn. And how do I not navigate this position? And so we live in complex societies. It's not as simple as, a child is born and the child just goes off, the parent abandons them like some animals will do. I just abandon the child and the child has to figure it out in the wild. We are very different in the way that we function. Second, we have social groups that are not casual. This is important to understand. We're not just like casual friends. We come together and we bond and we get to know each other very well. And it's only when we get to know people very well that we feel a sense of belonging. Otherwise, and I've heard this sentiment expressed a lot, a person will say, I know a lot of people, but I'm not close to anybody. Like they kind of float on the surface with everybody. And for a while, it's okay. But especially in those moments when you're really, really hurting, and you haven't connected deeply with anyone, it's hard to share. Because you never went deep in a convo with anybody. You've always kind of floated on the surface. And so out of the blue to just show up with any one of them and just pour out your heart would be like overwhelming for them. They're like not expecting that. And so our relationships require that we really, really invest in the relationships in order for them to be very healthy and strong. And to do that, you have to remember a lot of information about people. Think about that. Imagine you knew somebody who every time you met them forgot everything about you, like from before. So you met them like, hey, where are you from again? Or what's your name? Even just a name. If someone doesn't remember your name, isn't it painful? Like after 3 weeks, they're still like, what's your name again? You're like, dude, like we've been talking like 3 weeks straight here now. Like what's happening? Maybe, we start worrying like either you don't care about me, so that you have to remember a lot. And And the capacity that we require, remember, is there is a certain amount of stress that accompanies a friendship. No? A certain amount. It might differ from friend to friend. But for example, for some friends, they require that you remember their birthday. How many of you have friends like that? That require that you remember their birthday? Really? None of y'all? Are you just not telling the truth? Like,
I'm the friend.
You're the friend, okay. But do you guys understand what I'm saying here? So now you have to not just remember your birthday, you have to remember your friends' birthdays, and then you have to plan stuff for that. And so there's a lot of stress that goes into trying to maintain it. And that's why when people who are really highly stressed, one of the first things they might do is isolate. Interestingly, right? Because we would think, well, if you're stressed, you should reach out to somebody. But remember, friendships involve what? A certain degree of stress. And I don't know how to process this stress that we have in our relationship. And so I'm going to reduce as many, like you close apps on your computer when it's like slowing down everything, you just close everything. All right? Shut it all down. A person will do that. Just isolate, not talk to anybody. Because I need to reduce the amount of stress I have in my life right now. I can't talk to too many people. But the thing with that is, when people do that, others assume what? No, they don't want to be talked to. So then they also pull back, which confirms for this person that nobody cares about them. And it's a really interesting cycle that develops. Because I've had conversations with people where they'll say, like, I don't really care about them. But then later on they'll say something about, yeah, but like, I really wish they would reach out to me. I'm like, what? What do you mean? You don't care about them, but now you want them to reach out to you? Like, how does that work? So they're saying, I don't care about them, which probably reflects in their behavior, acting like I don't care about them. But a part of you is like, but come on, I need you to chase after me. And you see this sometimes in marital relationships, where one person will say, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. And you can't walk away. You cannot walk away and be like, oh, nothing's wrong. Okay, that's cool. No, you have to chase them and be like, excuse me, what's wrong? We're not going to talk about who says what, all right? I'll just say it. If you got it, you got it. You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's stop here, inshallah. There's more that I want to cover, but we'll stop here, inshallah. Salatul Maghrib time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to realize the importance of one another in our lives and the people around us in our lives, and the importance of maintaining the relationships, maintaining the family bonds, maintaining the communal bonds that we have with the people around us. May He grant us tawfiq to fulfill the rights of all those around us that they have upon us. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.